welcome to the $1 Billion Podcast, a weekly show about the entrepreneurial journey and making it big in any industry. We're your hosts, Joe White and Kane Daniel. Welcome to another episode of the $1 Billion Podcast. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Stephanie Cortese. Hi, Stephanie.
How are you?
I'm wonderful. With over a decade in education and a master's degree under her belt, Stephanie's continually pursued personal growth. She's the creative force behind the podcast for Company, an artist, and a photographer. Since January 2023, Stephanie's been a mortgage agent with the Mortgage Coach brokerage. Above all, Stephanie is a devoted mom to her two children who inspire her to be her very best every day. Please join us in welcoming Stephanie to the podcast.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Wow. Thank you. It was an amazing intro. Thank you.
Oh, you're well. You know what? A little birdie told me that you're an amazing person. So we're looking forward to getting into that in more detail. And it seems like you've worn many hats over the years. So maybe you could tell us about your journey and how you've managed to balance all of those different roles.
Oh, balance is such a great word. I've been called crazy most of my life. I don't know. I am very much, I'm a strong believer in learning and almost to an addictive sense. So I heard a quote once, a very long time ago, and it never left me. And it was learn as much as you can, unlearn it, and start again. And I don't know why it hit me the way that it did, but I've never forgotten it. And it's just something that's always pushed me to try new things. And I'm also an ADHD, I'm an ADHDer. So there's this motivation of wanting to constantly be trying and doing and learning. And then I feel like I've gotten really good at something, and then I want to keep going. And then it's the next goal. And what can I do? And how can I just push a bit further? So, yeah.
That's cool. So do you find that you're able to balance between your different roles, like being a mom, being a business person? Do you find you're able to get that balance?
I don't know. I don't know if it's balanced, as I try to approach it as can they kind of harmonize, right? Because I think balance is, I'll speak for myself and say it's intimidating because I don't know that I do it right. But what I try to do is I try to approach it in the sense I'm open with my kids and I'm open with my family, and mom's going to go do this right now. And it's the time to just do that. And it's got to be uninterrupted. And I really, really have to make a point in segregating that time. But then when it's my kids' time, or when it's mom time, or when it's soccer night, or whatever it is, I have to be as equally dedicated to not responding to my phone, right? So I try to harmonize it that way. And so they understand, like we're very open about it, because it can be very overwhelming, and we're parents and guilt is real. And so if I'm open and if I'm really present when I'm in those things or in that space, it feels better. It's not perfect, but I try and harmonize it that way. I try and approach it that way.
Yeah, you're right. Parental guilt is a real thing.
It's real, and they can lay it on thick sometimes too. I'll be honest with you. Like, my kids are smart, so it's like, okay. But yeah, I have a 8-year-old and a 6-year-old.
Okay. Yeah, mine are 7 and 10.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the guilt is more of an art form than anything else.
Absolutely. And my kids, and I will share this story. It was recently, I was on a call with a client, and they know not to go into the office. Like, I told them I had a certain amount of time in the afternoon. And my daughter, bless her beautiful heart, opened the door quietly, and I'm kind of like trying, like, oh my gosh, she doesn't usually do that. And she had cookies in her hand, and she pointed to the cookie, and I went, and I'm shaking my head, and she was like, and I'm like, oh, you little bugger. And then she was like, And then she left the room and she ate the cookie knowing that I couldn't answer. And she kind of giggled and left. And I was like, oh, you bugger. And I couldn't do anything because typically I would say not until after dinner. But anyway, so they're very smart. That's the point.
Very smart. Very smart. You know, I absolutely think that's a wonderful word, harmonize. That really puts it in a different light in trying to balance things. I think balance is one or the other. Harmonizing is really having everything work together.
Yeah, it just and like every day. I mean, I know some people do it probably better than I do it, where every day changes for me, right? So I can't I segregate certain sections of time because I have to, but it doesn't look the same every day. So sometimes I have to step back and be like, what if, if it's been a couple of days where it's like, you know what, I really need to make time here now. Like it changes and it fluctuates, and the flexibility is really, really important, but it's harmonizing as a whole versus like structuring it a certain way, balancing it time perfectly. I for our schedule, for our lives, it doesn't, we tried that. I did try that. Didn't work as well. So we just try to approach it that way.
That's amazing. So tell me a bit about this is where you're at now in harmonizing.
Yeah.
But how did you decide to get into this industry? What prompted you?
Great question. And I use the cliche term COVID, and I know because we've heard it a lot now, but the COVID time forced all of us to stay very still. And that's not something I was accustomed to. So when that happened, we were in a position financially where we had to make some decisions and we had to organize things. We had the time to do it. So our mortgage agent was a friend of ours, and I was starting to feel very, very stagnant, a lot of self-reflection as that was happening at that time. And so I was talking to our friend, our mortgage agent, and we had to put some things in play. And I was just also openly sharing, because we had a great relationship, about like, how are you guys doing? How are you guys feeling? I'm like, I think I'm looking for a change, or I'm looking for something to add under my belt kind of thing. And, he said, I think you'd be really great at this. And I said, no. And he said, why not? And I said, I openly said, I'm like, I don't do numbers. Like, I don't do numbers. I do people. Like, I like talking to people. I don't do numbers. And then he looked at me and goes, that's all I do. Like, that's all I do is I work with people, and it's so impactful. And we had this it turned into one conversation, turned to another. And then I really started thinking about it, and it never left me. And afterward, I kind of researched it and pursued it a bit more. And I'm like, you know what? And then it appealed to me sort of with my educational background. I'm like, I wonder if I approached this and I put my own spin on it, and I really approached it from a holistic, where I know there's gaps, where I know that there are gaps from what I worked in, I could really fill in those gaps and help people. And so then it became we call it going down the rabbit hole, us ADHDers. So then I got really obsessed with this idea, and I'm like, I think I could really do something here. I think I could really impact and help people. And then that was it. And then I went down the rabbit hole, I enrolled, and yeah.
Amazing. What gaps did you identify?
So what I will say, I'll speak from a personal story as well, because I think it's the best example. So when I was in school, I was a student that chose the academic pathway. I've always loved learning, and I knew I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to teach, and I wanted to get into education. So the academic pathway stream is always what I chose. When I was toward the end of high school, beginning of university, it was time for me to buy a car. And I was so excited. It was my first car. And I remember it was my dad and my boyfriend, who's now my husband at the time. I said, you have to come with me. And he's like, okay, great. Like, why do I have to come with you? He's like, because I don't know what I'm doing. I had no concept of interest and terms and compound. I don't know what any of that meant. It didn't make me stupid. It just, I wasn't exposed to some of the more common, basic understandings that are day to day. Because in school, it was very segregated to one kind of learning. Whereas I talked to my dad or my mom, and like they all had a home ec class, right? Like my dad knew how to sew a button, my mom knew how to sew a button, and they went into very different pathways kind of thing. So the gaps that I saw, I feel, was very much in the practicality of certain skill sets, that it doesn't matter the pathway you choose. You got to understand compounds and credit cards and sort of your basics, budgeting, like decision-making skills, like those types of more financial decision-making skills, where that's where I felt there was the biggest gaps. And that's even from my own personal experience.
Right.
So,
wow, that's great. That's, yeah, you know what, filling a gap like that I guess that would give you that purpose, that mission, right? And that's important to have.
well, and I find too, like I am that generation. So now I am that adult that I'm working with. So now I'm working with clients that are fabulous, responsible people, but that don't have necessarily the confidence in budgeting or managing, because it's not something we're learning it the hard way. Like we learned it more the hard way, and life will do that, of course. But in terms of, it wasn't necessarily an ingrained practice when we were in school. It's just something you kind of have to figure out. So for me, when I started to approach this industry or this business, I'm like, I think I want that to be part of my business when I'm working with clients.
That makes total sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So tell me a bit about your day-to-day in your business right now. Like what's that look like? It must be, I mean, I know I mentioned in the intro that you have you've developed a creative outlet for yourself with the podcast that's for company.
Yeah.
So what is your daily your routine look like, and how do you fit that into it?
So it does depend. So I block times, and I'm really good at chunking. So like
Okay.
we'll do batches of one thing, or if it's the podcast that we're doing, and I really do say this sincerely. I love talking to people. So I'll batch it. Let's just say over the course of a month, we'll record several episodes. We'll do it that way. In terms of my business, depending on the scheduling of my kids, like that's who they become are the nucleus, like our center. So I always allot, our mornings are kind of dedicated for the kids. Afternoons are typically are mine, like where I get to meet with clients, or when I do my planning, whether it's CRM or organizing, kind of that stuff. And then afternoons, dinner time, I do my best. It's dinner time or soccer or jiu-jitsu, whatever that is. And then when they go to bed. So depending on how I can structure it that way, that's kind of how the business side works. I'm fortunate my husband's also coming from a sales background. So he gets it, thank goodness. So we tag team a lot too. So I'm like, hey, like I got to take this, or I have to do this night. He's like, hey, I got it. And then we switch it off, kind of thing. So it does fluctuate. We do a lot of chunking. And that helps a lot.
So in regards to the chunking, because I find this fascinating to be able to do this, and some people have different strategies when it comes to blocking time.
Yeah.
Do you find that you need to almost like clean your palate after you've blocked one period of time? For example, some of the things I do, if I'm blocking an hour, I'll block 50 minutes, and then 10 minutes I'll just try to deaden my mind and then be able to go into the next topic. What do you do? How do you transition?
Oh, so good. So so typically right before an episode, or if I'm doing anything in that sense, or meeting a client, I need a few minutes before. I always need a good 10, 15 minutes before. I typically have, whether it's calming music, like there's like a zone I get into, all my questions, what sort of the package, if it's a client, then I'll kind of review the information that I have. I need time before, and then the after, I always need decompression time. Like I always need to be like, okay, what are my next steps? I need to do that right now so that I'm set up for the next time. So I agree with you. If it's an hour, then really it's like 50, 45 minutes. And then I need the before, and I need the after.
Cool. Do you consider yourself like an extrovert or an introvert?
These are great questions, Joe. These are
and I'm asking that, like I'm asking that because for me, I use the time in between appointments to kind of settle myself down. But I'm fairly introverted, so when I'm doing something, the interaction takes it out of me. So yeah, I need the time in between. How what's it like for you?
Exact same. So
Okay.
so this is what the research that I've done on myself in terms of ADHD. I am energized by people. Like I pull energy from people. I love it. So in that sense, I've always considered myself extroverted. However, I do find that when I'm with people for a certain amount of time, I find it incredibly, incredibly draining. And I'll need, depending on what the day looks or how many we do in a day, or again, if I'm doing meeting lenders and clients, like if it's a jam-packed day, I'm loving it. Like I love it. I'm excited to do it. But I recognize that the next day I have to schedule less because I just need to recharge. Like I just need a bit of I just need to recharge it. That's all. And also too, like this was part of that harmonizing and some hard lessons I've learned with my kids. They get the remnants if I don't, right? Because then I'm just tired and I'm grumpy and they get the remnants of that. And like that's not fair. So that has been definitely something I've had to work at, where I'm very present when I'm there, and I'm excited and I'm energized, and then I need that time to come back 100%.
And that's brilliant how you use that for that harmonizing. That's yeah. I've some of us in the educational field and the brokering field. In running Remic, I teach as well.
Yeah.
But some of my instructors I tell you, they can do a 6-hour course in the day, and then they feel like, you know what, I'm pumped. I want to go out. I want to paint the town red. I want to keep going. For me, after 6 hours, it's like, okay, I want to go lay on the couch and watch some brain-numbing TV because I'm exhausted. And it's fascinating the different types of people when it comes to how they get that energy.
And it just depends how you get it, right? Because there are times absolutely where I'm teaching, you're energized by it, and then you're like, okay, what's next? Like what? Like you're like, and I try to ride that wave as long as I can because I know I'm gonna come down and I'm gonna need a day or two. So let's just ride this as long as I can. And then I need to allot that time at some point this week. I'm gonna need it, and that's okay. And take it without. I'm trying to learn to take it without guilt, and that's a hard thing too. So when it is my downtime or I'm being less productive, even though rest is productive, but that's my own internal battle too, where it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many things I could be doing right now, like because that's the brain and that's how we do it. But it's like no. Like I need to be here. I need to sit here. I need to watch this episode of The Office again. Like whatever it is, I need to do that because I love it. So I need to do it so that I really am charged for the next thing. And I approach the next thing with my 100%.
Yeah, that is a problem, right? Like thinking when you need to.
Bless you.
When you need to sneeze.
Absolutely.
You know, the issue, I find I struggle with the same thing. I need to chill out, but then I feel like, you know what, I love The Office. I'm watching another episode of The Office or rewatching an episode of The Office. And, you know, then my brain starts to wander a little bit and I think, oh, I should be doing this. And then there's a guilt. There's a guilt there. I think it's something that our society doesn't teach, that self-care is as necessary as going out and being productive.
100%.
It's a challenge.
Necessary is the key word.
So when you look at that downtime and you look at taking care of yourself, would you say that your podcast, That's for Company, helps you with that, or do you feel it's something else that takes from you?
When it starts to feel like it takes, I pause, and it's a signal to me. So I feel like it gives a lot because again, when I meet people, so the idea with the podcast was that, and I've even tried to structure it around my own tendencies. So I chunk my topics based on an interest because I know like I stick to it. I'm meeting people within that topic that are also completely passionate about what they're doing. So again, it's that transference of energy that I love. And then I'll do a segment on whichever topic, entrepreneurship or spirituality, whatever it is at that time. And then I would say it probably runs 6 to 8 episodes in that segment. And then I've often found that that's when it's time to kind of go down and then regroup. And then it's like, what is the next topic that I feel like I want to share? I want to find people. I want to talk, trying to kind of gauge culture and climate at that time. And then that's how I kind of structure it, because and as you know, like it's a lot of work. It's amazing, but it's a lot of work. So there is that gauge of when it starts to feel like, oh no, like this is a lot, then it's time. It's time to break and then regroup and organize the next thing for it.
That's fantastic. That's great advice as well. I think that's great advice for anything in life, right? When it starts to feel like a burden, you need to put it on the shelf for a bit. But what is the podcast address, or where can we listen to it?
So the podcast is available on all platforms. So there's it's Apple, it's Spotify, it's Google Music, it's Amazon, so you can access it anywhere as well. But yeah, it's a creative outlet that's always focused on interests that I've been obsessed with. And it's again, I say this because it's a product of COVID. And it was very much going through a variety of sort of self-reflective things. And that's when I got my ADHD diagnosis as well as my husband. And I was trying to grab resources that I didn't know where to go. Like I didn't know where to go and what could I afford? But then I was finding resources and then we couldn't afford it. So it's like, oh my goodness, like so what happened was I started reaching out to people and asking very direct questions. And then it kind of triggered something where I'm like, you know what? It would be so great if this information was more accessible. And then that's kind of how it started. So was kind of in the midst of trying to find my own answers, I started connecting to people, recording it and being like, I think this could also be something. And sort of that's how it happened until.
That's fantastic. Have you found that you've gotten any business from that by making connections with people at all?
Business itself, I would say it's the networking more so. Definitely the networking. And I would say I've given business happily. Like since it sort of happened, I've had so many peers in a variety of topics, whether it's educational, whether it has been ADHD, whether it has been mortgages. I've been able to connect people to resources. And that is a phenomenal feeling to be able just to do that. Or when they're asking me something, it's like, oh my gosh, I feel very confident to tell you this person who's a doctor told me, and having those types of conversations. Very empowering to sort of share that with people 100%.
That's amazing. How long have you been doing it?
My goodness, trying to think. It was the first few months into COVID.
Okay.
It was like 2020-ish is kind of when we sort of piloted. And then I wasn't making it for a while, like researching it, trying to put it together, which took some time. So about 2020, I would say.
All right. Fantastic. I'm sure that, just by people listening in and learning a bit more about you, that helps in the networking aspect of it, whether directly or indirectly, right? I mean, giving back it sounds like what you're doing. And when you give back, that always, that whole karma thing, I don't know if I believe in karma, but the whole concept of karma is this would be definitely good for your karma.
I hope so. And I think I've been very fortunate. Like the people I've approached, professionals and non-professionals, either people willing to share their story or their knowledge, again, whether depending on their area of expertise, they've just been so giving. Like there hasn't been a person I had approached about this idea. Would you mind if I recorded a conversation? And I've never heard a no. I'd be like, I'd love to share this. And I'd be like, really? In the first few, I was like, you want to talk to me? Like, really? Like, it was just so, I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. Like, it was something I take a lot from. And they've also inspired, I have hopefully other outlets coming down the pipe, and they've inspired other ways. Like, you should write a book. I'm like, should I? And like, it's just been such an amazing exchange. So I've been very fortunate that way.
That's fantastic. Now, a lot of new agents, brokers, they struggle with coming up with a name. And I'm curious as to how you came up with the name for your podcast.
I giggle because it's another story. So I had the idea for a podcast, and the name I struggled with the absolute longest. And I had other names for it, and I didn't like it. I was folding laundry, and that's how the name came to me. I was folding a towel, and I went, and it popped in my head, and it was from a story I had. I was processing about what I wanted the podcast to be. And I was going it over and over in my head, and I'm like, I loved talking to people. I'm like, why do I love talking to people? Like, where does that come from? And as a kid, I remember my parents on Friday and Saturday nights, they were very social. And it was of the time where people came over. Like, we had company come over just socially for a coffee. And like on a Friday night after dinner, we tidied up because we didn't know who was going to come, but somebody was going to pop in. And I remember it was one of the best memories of my parents, because it didn't matter what the house looked like you tidied it up like enough, but like people coming in and out of your home was welcomed. Whereas now it's like that panic of, oh my God, like fix the cushions, like kind of thing. But it was so different. It was the happiest memories of my parents that I remember, my parents being so relaxed with company. So every week we'd go grocery shopping, and we always had a section in the cart of dessert that you couldn't touch. So like my mom would buy pound cakes, and she'd buy like little donuts, and she'd put it in the cart. I'm like, oh, and she'd be like, don't touch it. That's for company. Like, that's for our company. Don't touch it. So like in our pantry, like we had a section where it's like we couldn't sneak into the dessert or the snack because that was for company. So I was folding a towel one day, and it literally popped in my head where my mom's saying, that's for company. And I thought, that's the name. Like, that's the name. And that is literally, it was the desserts we couldn't touch because it was for company that was coming over that weekend. We didn't know who it was, but somebody was going to be there, and we weren't allowed to touch it.
That's a brilliant story. And you know what? It's a super unique name. And it's those unique type of names that you don't see, or you can't really make a correlation between the name, that it sticks out. And I don't know, have you talked about the creation of your name in your podcast?
I have. So the first episode or two, I explained it, because when I tell people, and it's funny you say that, because I've told people that I have a podcast, like, oh, what's it about? And I've said the name, they're like, oh, but what's it about? Because there's no indication as to in terms of, it's not telling of anything, which is also kind of cool in a way in terms of my own style, because I tend to go to different topics anyway. So yeah, I've had that before, like, but what is it? And I'm like, everything. Everything.
You know what? That's a fascinating icebreaker as well, right? I mean, if you're networking, it's I'm in mortgages. I have a podcast called That's for Company. That I can't imagine somebody, when you told them, if you tell them that they'll just brush that aside. The first thing out of my mouth would be, oh, what's your podcast about? And that's what a great icebreaker.
Yeah.
That's cool. So maybe we can switch gears a little bit, and I'd love to ask you, I mean, you've been in the industry a few years now. What were your challenges that you faced when you first made the decision to get into this business?
Oh, goodness. I'll say confidence was a big one. Like, confidence on a personal level, confidence was, I think, what we all struggle with, regardless necessarily of, you may, I guess, get more comfortable, but the ability to feel like I can really help. Like, that took a little while to really be confident enough to approach a person or a family and say, listen, I come to you as a certified educated person with a lot of life experience. I've been through a lot. I've had highs and lows, and I'm happy to help any way I can. And I sort of had to lead with that. And then it became easier with that. But that was a lot to do with my own coming into it with confidence that I can really help you here. And then the second part on a professional level was just keeping it organized, honestly, like keeping the timing organized, keeping the information. I've created or really leaned on CRM systems, thank goodness, in terms of technologies. Really embraced some of them because it really does help keep things organized and in place so that I can approach it at 100% in very structured ways.
That's cool. Did you when you got in, did you start with the mortgage coach right away?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you get some mentoring? I've heard great things about the mortgage coach. Have you gotten some mentoring there when you started? And if so, would you say that was part of your success so quickly?
100%. I'm very fortunate to work where I work. I have had incredible mentorships. I entered this profession with such a naive outlook. Like I had no idea what to expect. I honestly didn't. And it was the most welcoming environment that I almost didn't understand it. I truly, and I spoke to one of our underwriters. We went to my first month. I was invited to an event and I went, a big group of us, we were getting to know each other. And I looked at my underwriter and I said, "Is this real?" And she kind of giggled and she goes, "I don't know what you're talking. What does that mean?" I go, "Are these people actually this nice?" And she started laughing and she's like, "Yes, it's real." And I just said, because I don't get it. Because aren't we all kind of in competition? Like I was so naive to it. I'm like, she's like, "We are, but not really." Because there's plenty of room at the table. And that has always been how I have felt, the motto of it. It has been an incredible experience. The mentors that I've had, the people I've worked with, we lean on each other a lot, like just questions, like, what do I do? I don't know what to do with this. Doesn't matter what time. I get an answer in our chats, like I get answers. It has been incredible. And I truly feel like that has been part of the growth where I don't ever feel too stuck. Like I may be stuck at the moment, but I'm like, no, I can get an answer for you pretty quick. And I know I can. So that part has been incredible.
Amazing. So when it comes to you starting to get business, when you got into this, how did you go about getting, your first client?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I giggle again because a friend of mine, I didn't know how. I'm like, do I just, and again, I went to my group and I went to my brokerage or my teams and I said, do I just like tell people? Like, I don't know what to do here. Like, because again, I come from an educational background. So it's like, do I just say, "Hey guys," like, and they said, yeah. They literally, like, it was like, "Why wouldn't you?" I'm like, "Because I don't know how to do that." And they're like, "Okay, well, you're going to create a message. Like, how about we just start with something like, there is not a person in the world that shouldn't know what you do. All they have to do is know what you do. You don't need to go further. You just need to tell them what you do." And that's step one. And that's exactly what I did. So I started creating just messages saying, "Hey guys, I'm starting a new project. I'm so excited. Send." And it literally started from there. And then it was my first few clients were family. And then from there it became peers. And now, a couple years in, the events and networking groups that I'm lucky to be part of and sort of done, it's kind of snowballed from there.
Amazing. So when it came to your family, your immediate family, was it immediate family that you dealt with?
Yes, they were. Yeah, it was my sister was first. And it happened to be renewal. So I'm like, sweet. Yes.
What did she think about sharing her information with you? Because that's an ongoing concern that people have. Like new agents say that, I should go and try and get business from my family and friends, but they don't want to share their personal information.
I didn't get that with my sister. She was actually quite excited because she was very like, "You do it. Like, here, you take it. Like, because I'll handle more for her." Right. So that was very open that way. But I will say we did experience that with a few friends. Like I had a few peers approach me saying, I would love for you to do our mortgage, but I do hesitate because it's my whole life, right? Like I'm going to dive in, and that's every client, but peers are different. So it's like, I'm going to go into your credit history and I'm going to see your whole life. And that can be very personal. And for some people, naturally defensive, right? And that's something we, as agents, I think that's a huge trust factor and one that we should take seriously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess it doesn't hurt that you have a good team behind you to help in that process, right?
Joe, I'm going to pause. Sorry, 1 second.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry, I just noticed my cord disconnected.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Were you losing power?
Yeah, I was about to lose power. I'm like, oh my God. It disconnected and I didn't see that it did. My apologies.
No worries. So that is one of the parts that we will just
edit. Yes.
Leave on the cutting room floor. Okay. Another question that I have for you is in regards to your background in education, because we have similar backgrounds there. How did you find your background in education and creativity influence your approach in the mortgage industry, like how you get clients, and have you found that helped you?
Absolutely. I think again, I can speak to how I approach a client in the same way. Like I worked specifically as a high school teacher for many years, and then I got into alt education, so I worked with at-risk youth. So what that taught me was the ability to approach every situation completely neutral. And that's how I approach my clients. So again, we talk about that vulnerability and we talk about that trust factor. I take it very, very similarly. So I'm not here to judge anything. I don't need to judge it. I don't need to know the whys and the hows. I just need to know what are we going to do from today and what are we going to do going forward. That's what I need to know. Everything else is just detail. So how I sort of approached my classroom is in the exact same way I approach my business. All
right. Yeah, that makes total sense. When you're talking to your clients, what are you finding, or maybe there's no underlying theme, but do you find that your clients have any concern in common? I guess where I'm going with this is, rates and everything else, uncertainty. Are you finding in your own practice that there's a theme?
A few things. I think, of course, rates, as of recently, it's the question we're all going to get. So for sure. And I also always take the time to explain a rate is a product like anything else. So it is a product, it's a package. So sometimes the best rate is not the best package. It's not the best product for you. And I always preface it by saying, hear my whole thing, because I'm not just saying that. Let me explain what I mean by that. So then we talk about the idea of options and what's behind the product. And do you want to move in 2 years? Then maybe this product doesn't make sense. I've had many conversations with posted rates. So I've had people call me and say, well, this brokerage has this posted rate. I'm like, that's an insured rate. That's not real. That's not real for your circumstance, and explaining what that means and really understanding that there's more to this than just the rate. So that's definitely been conversations we're having all the time. And I welcome them. I welcome them because I get it. I've been in that position prior to coming into this industry. So to us, it's just a rate and then a bunch of paper we sign and then a payment every month, right? So a client doesn't necessarily get the in-between. Fair enough. But it's explaining that yes, rate is important, but also service. And please understand that my service is to find the best for your circumstance. And maybe what your neighbor has is not what you're going to get because it's two different circumstances. So that I find a theme. And I mean, right now with the way that renewals and refinances are, in terms of what we're coming out of, a very, very common theme is the debts that have been accumulated and how people have had to figure it out. And what are we going to do with the debt right now and how we refinance it and how we make it work in the best way for their families. That's been two big themes, I would say.
Okay. Do you find in speaking with your clients that there are any misconceptions that they have about uh, brokers? It's one of the things I've always thought about that we have 30 to 40% market share depending on if it's a first time buyer or not.
Yeah.
And some of the surveys that I've conducted, people I've talked to still have misconceptions of mortgage brokers. Do you find that when you're talking to people as well?
I do. When I was coming into the industry, and I told a few friends that I was coming into this industry, and I had those that were so supportive and so wonderful. And I have very honest peers as well. And they said a few things to me. They're like, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Yeah, like I'm gonna try this. I really want to try this." And they're like, "Oh." I'm like, "What does that mean? What's that reaction?" And they're like, "Well, like there's just some fraud and there's just some agents that really try and take advantage of people." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I guess we could say that about every profession, right? Like in any profession that exists, you have those that are great and maybe those that are not in it for the best intentions. But it's all experience. Like I've had agents my whole life, whether mortgage, insurance agents. I said, I've always worked with agents and brokers, and I've had amazing experience. And I'm sure there are those, of course, that don't. So I do think there's misconceptions 100%. But I also think that that's like anything, how you approach it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. I mean, the fact that, there are bank employees that,
Yeah, absolutely.
defraud people and it gets kind of swept under the rug and maybe it's not talked about as much. And, rightfully so. If there's fraud in an industry like our industry,
Absolutely.
I think it needs to be talked about right up front and dealt with. But it is fascinating that banks still have such a hold on mortgage consumers. I mean, I think that's changing. What do you think that we need to do to maybe change that perception in the industry?
I think the reality is that clients have computers in their pockets, right? I think a person can apply for a credit card, a mortgage online at any given second. And like anything, technology is here to stay, as we know, and it's coming into everything. So I think what we need to focus on is customer relationships. Because the truth of the matter is that they don't have to come to me for a rate or a mortgage. They can do it themselves. They're going to come to me for the service, and they're going to come to me for the conversations and the knowledge, and also for the convenience of, like my sister, take care of this for me. No problem. Happy to do so. But the customer service is, my opinion, what we need to focus all the energy on. We are in the business of people, then we are in the business of mortgages and finance. So if we can approach them with that empathy and with that understanding that they come with their own narrative and their own choices and decisions that they've had to make, and if we can approach it just with curiosity first, not judgment, not question, not even questions, just curiosity, then start from there and understand that that is part of the privilege and just getting to know. And then going from that point, in my opinion, is where we need to stay as relevant as possible. And we are relevant. Like, we are incredibly important. Right? Like, incredibly, especially now, especially now when things are the way that they are, having that person you can call or trust is so important. And I think that we need to shift a little bit, but that doesn't make our role less valuable. I think it's a lot more, to be honest, but just, we need to encompass more than just the documents, right? Than just the product itself, I think.
Yeah, no, and that makes a lot of sense to me because it seems like these personal conversations, networking, individual networking,
Yep.
for our industry is much better or much more important than like splashy ad campaigns that, national campaigns that they're not going to talk to people in the same way as you having an individual conversation with in your social media or at a networking event is going to. Yeah, so that's really well said. So looking back on your career, what advice would you give to anyone else who's thinking of getting into this business?
Just start. Just start. Like literally, I wasted, I don't want to say I wasted, but a little bit I wasted so much time overthinking and self-doubting. And it's like, just, it doesn't have to be perfect, but just start. And whether it is this industry, which I strongly encourage because I've never been so surrounded with like-minded, empowered, motivating people in my life. Like the people I have met have inspired like different parts of myself that I didn't even know existed. So it's been incredible. But whether it is this industry or another idea, you're never too old to unlearn and relearn. It's part of the journey. It's part of the process. And just start. It doesn't matter if the Facebook page doesn't look the way that you want it or the post doesn't sound the way that you like it. Just post it. Like just get out there, just do it. And then it builds the confidence from there. Just do it.
What a fantastic piece of advice. I think anybody who's listening and who's on the fence, whether this industry or another move, if you've been considering making a move, you're right. You should just life's too short. Life is long, but it's also very, very short.
It is.
And make the move and don't have any regrets, right?
Absolutely.
Well, Stephanie, this has been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us. I think our viewers and listeners are gonna gain a lot that they'll be able to take away and apply to their personal lives. And I really do appreciate the time. Now, Stephanie, for somebody who wants to get in touch with you, how can they get a hold of you?
So the easiest way to get a hold of me is my website, stephc.ca. It's the easiest, quickest way to get in touch. I have links there that they can also access the podcast. And I have some exciting news that I really wanted to announce. I wrote a book. I wrote an ebook, and I'm launching it at the end of this month. And it's called Sick and Tired of Being Sick and Tired. And it's a framework of understanding sort of how our personal wellness and our financial wellness are actually intrinsically connected. So I'm launching that at the end of the month, and they will be able to access that through my website at stephc.ca.
That is wonderful. Would you be willing to come back right after your launch, and we can chat about the book?
I would love to. I'd love to do that.
Awesome. All right, Stephanie, thank you again.
Thank you.
We wish you all the best, and we can't wait to get our hands on the royal we, I don't know, but me personally, I can't wait to get my hands on that book and get into some of your insights. So thank you very much. Wish you all the best.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to the $1 Billion Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode.
For more in-depth entrepreneurial insights, follow us on social media, and for more info on the show, go to billiondollarpodcast.com.
See you next time.